The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Command training facility in Coronado, California. Sarah Chun adjusted her civilian clothes one last time before stepping out of her rental car. At 28, she looked like any other visitor to the base. Average height, understated appearance, carrying only a small backpack, and what appeared to be routine paperwork. The security guards barely glanced at her credentials as she passed through the main gate. What they didn't know was that Sarah had spent the last 8 years of her life in places most people couldn't pronounce, doing things that would never appear in any official record. Born to a Taiwanese mother and Irish father in San Francisco, she had grown up speaking 3 languages fluently and learning early that being underestimated was often her greatest advantage. The invitation to observe SEAL Team 301's training exercise had come through official channels, though Sarah suspected there was more to it than a simple educational visit. The Department of Defense had been quietly evaluating new training methodologies, and her unique background in psychological warfare and close-quarters combat had apparently caught someone's attention. She made her way across the compound, noting the careful choreography of military life around her. Young sailors hurried between buildings, their uniforms crisp and their movements purposeful. In the distance, she could hear the rhythmic sound of boots on pavement and the occasional bark of an instructor's voice. The briefing room was located in a nondescript building near the training grounds. As Sarah approached, she could see through the windows that it was already occupied. 31 men in various stages of combat gear were seated in neat rows, their attention focused on a large tactical display at the front of the room. These were the members of SEAL Team 301, elite warriors who had seen action in every major conflict zone of the past decade. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Rodriguez stood at the front of the room, his weathered face bearing the marks of countless missions in hostile territory. At 42, he was old enough to command respect through experience, but young enough to still lead from the front when necessary. His dark eyes swept across his men as he outlined the day's training scenario. "Gentlemen, today's exercise will test your ability to adapt to unexpected circumstances," Rodriguez began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned his position through blood and sacrifice rather than politics. "Intelligence reports suggest that our target facility may be defended by personnel with advanced training. We cannot assume that every enemy combatant will fit our standard threat assessment." The SEALs listened with the focused attention that came from knowing their lives might one day depend on the information being shared. Most of them were in their late 20s or early 30s, their bodies bearing the subtle scars that came with their profession. They had all volunteered for the most dangerous assignments their country could offer, and they took pride in their reputation as the military's premier fighting force. Sarah paused outside the briefing room door, checking her watch. She was exactly on time, which had always been one of her professional habits. Punctuality was a sign of respect, and respect was something that had to be earned rather than assumed. She took a deep breath and knocked twice on the doorframe. "Come in," Rodriguez called out, his tone suggesting he was expecting her arrival. Sarah opened the door and stepped inside, immediately feeling the weight of 31 pairs of eyes assessing her. She had experienced this kind of scrutiny before, but it never became comfortable. These men were trained to evaluate threats and opportunities in milliseconds, and she could almost feel their collective judgment forming. "Gentlemen, this is Sarah Chun," Rodriguez announced, gesturing toward her with one hand while maintaining his position at the front of the room. "She's here to observe today's training exercise as part of a Department of Defense evaluation program. Please continue with your normal procedures." A few of the SEALs exchanged glances, and Sarah caught the subtle eye rolls and suppressed smirks that passed between them. She recognized the look. It was the same expression she had seen on the faces of countless men over the years who had made the mistake of assuming they understood what they were looking at. Petty Officer First Class Jake Sullivan, a broad-shouldered man from Texas with arms that looked like they could crush steel pipes, leaned over to whisper something to the man next to him. His comment, though inaudible to most of the room, clearly involved some assessment of Sarah's credentials or lack thereof. The man next to him, Chief Petty Officer Mike Torres, grinned and nodded in agreement. Sarah took a seat in the back corner of the room, placing her backpack carefully at her feet and withdrawing a small notebook. She began writing, seemingly focused on documenting the briefing for her official report. In reality, she was cataloging everything she observed: the layout of the room, the positions of the men, their body language, their equipment, and, most importantly, their attitudes. Rodriguez continued his briefing, explaining that the day's exercise would involve a simulated hostage rescue in a mock urban environment constructed on the base. The scenario called for the team to infiltrate a building complex, neutralize hostile forces, and extract 3 civilian hostages while minimizing collateral damage. It was the kind of mission they had all trained for hundreds of times, but Rodriguez emphasized that today's exercise would include some unexpected variables. The opposing force will consist of base personnel trained to simulate terrorist tactics, Rodriguez explained, clicking through a series of slides that showed the layout of the training facility. However, intelligence suggests that the enemy may have recruited individuals with specialized combat training. Do not assume that everyone you encounter will be a standard OPFOR participant. Sergeant Danny Morrison, a compact man with the kind of intense focus that came from multiple combat deployments, raised his hand. Sir, are we talking about former military personnel or something else? The intelligence is deliberately vague, Morrison, Rodriguez replied. Your job is to adapt to whatever you encounter. That's what separates SEALs from conventional forces, the ability to think and react when the situation doesn't match the briefing. Sarah continued taking notes, but she was also studying the team's dynamics. She could see the informal hierarchy that existed beyond the official rank structure. Rodriguez was clearly the unquestioned leader, but there were several senior enlisted men who served as unofficial advisors and mentors to the younger team members. The group had the comfortable familiarity of men who had faced death together and lived to tell about it. As the briefing concluded, the SEALs began gathering their gear and preparing to move to the training area. Sarah noticed that their equipment was top of the line, the kind of weapons and technology that most military units could only dream of having. Each man carried a customized rifle that had been modified to his exact specifications, along with enough ammunition and explosive devices to level a small building. Ms. Chun, Rodriguez called out as the men began filing out of the room. You'll be observing from the command post. We'll have full video coverage of the exercise, and you'll be able to monitor all radio communications. Actually, Lieutenant Commander, Sarah replied, standing and shouldering her backpack, I was hoping to observe from a closer position. My report needs to include assessments of decision-making under realistic stress conditions. Video footage won't provide the same perspective. Rodriguez frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of having a civilian in proximity to live-fire exercises. Ms. Chun, I appreciate your dedication to thorough reporting, but these exercises can be unpredictable. I can't guarantee your safety if you're in the field. I understand the risks, Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. I've signed all the necessary waivers, and my security clearance allows for this level of access. I'll stay well back from the action and follow all safety protocols. Several of the SEALs had paused near the door to listen to this exchange. Sarah could see the amusement on their faces as they watched what they clearly viewed as a bureaucrat trying to play soldier. Sullivan made another comment to Torres, this one accompanied by a gesture that suggested he thought Sarah would be running for cover at the first sound of gunfire. Rodriguez considered for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. Very well, but you'll stay with me at all times, and if I tell you to take cover, you do it immediately without question. Understood, Sarah agreed. As they left the briefing room and headed toward the training area, Sarah found herself walking among the SEALs. She could hear fragments of their conversations, discussions about tactics, jokes about previous exercises, and the occasional comment about their unexpected observer. Most of them seemed to view her as an annoyance at best and a potential liability at worst. The training facility was an impressive piece of construction that had been designed to replicate urban combat environments with startling accuracy. Multi-story buildings, narrow alleyways, and realistic civilian areas have been crafted to provide the most challenging possible training scenarios. Live ammunition would be used, but with carefully controlled fields of fire and extensive safety measures. As they approached the staging area, Rodriguez began assigning roles and positions for the exercise. The team would be split into 3 squads, each with specific objectives within the overall mission parameters. Sarah noticed that despite their casual attitude toward her presence, the SEALs became completely professional once they started discussing tactics. Alpha Squad will take the primary assault route through the main building, Rodriguez explained, pointing to a detailed map of the training area. Bravo Squad will secure the perimeter and provide overwatch. Charlie Squad will handle the extraction route and maintain communications with base. Sarah continued observing and taking notes, but she was also beginning to form a plan of her own. The invitation to observe this exercise had been unusual from the beginning, and she suspected that she was being evaluated as much as she was evaluating. Someone wanted to know how she would perform under these circumstances, and she intended to exceed their expectations. The opposing force for the exercise had already taken their positions within the training facility. These were base personnel who had been trained to simulate terrorist tactics and provide realistic opposition for SEAL training exercises. They were armed with weapons that fired marking rounds rather than live ammunition, but they had been instructed to treat the exercise as if their lives depended on their performance. What none of the SEALs knew was that Sarah had spent considerable time studying their service records and previous mission reports. She knew their strengths, their weaknesses, their preferred tactics, and their individual personalities. More importantly, she knew exactly how they would react when faced with something unexpected. As the final preparations were made, Sarah found herself thinking about the path that had brought her to this moment. Her childhood in San Francisco had been unconventional, with parents who encouraged intellectual curiosity and physical fitness in equal measure. Her mother had been a martial arts instructor before immigrating to America, and her father had been a military historian who filled their house with books about warfare and strategy. College had provided her with degrees in psychology and international relations, but her real education had come afterward. Recruitment by a government agency that officially didn't exist had led to 8 years of training and missions that had taken her to every continent except Antarctica. She had learned to speak 7 languages fluently, to fight with weapons and without them, and to blend into any environment where her unique combination of skills might be needed. The current assignment was supposed to be a transition back to civilian life, but Sarah suspected it was actually another test. Someone in the government wanted to know if she could function in conventional military environments, or if her years of unconventional warfare had made her too independent for standard operations. "All right, gentlemen," Rodriguez announced, checking his watch. "We're 30 minutes from exercise commencement. Final equipment checks, and then we move to start positions." The SEALs began their familiar pre-mission rituals, checking weapons, adjusting gear, and mentally preparing for the challenges ahead. Sarah noticed that despite their confidence and experience, they still took these preparations seriously. Complacency was the enemy of survival, and these men had learned that lesson well. As she watched them work, Sarah felt a familiar sensation building in her chest. It was the same feeling she had experienced before every mission during her previous career, a combination of anticipation, focus, and controlled aggression that prepared her mind and body for whatever was about to happen. She had thought those days were behind her, but apparently some things never really changed. Rodriguez approached her one final time before the exercise began. "Ms. Chun, I want to make sure you understand the rules of engagement. This is a live-fire exercise with carefully controlled parameters. The opposing force is using marking rounds, but my men are using live ammunition. You are to remain in the designated observation areas at all times, and you will follow my instructions without question. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, Lieutenant Commander," Sarah replied. "I'm here to observe and learn, nothing more." Rodriguez nodded, but Sarah could see the doubt in his eyes. He had clearly dealt with civilian observers before, and his experience had taught him to expect problems. What he didn't realize was that Sarah's definition of observation might be considerably different from what he was expecting. As the team moved toward their start positions, Sarah found herself bringing up the rear of the formation. The SEALs moved with the fluid coordination that came from extensive training and combat experience, their movements economical and purposeful. She matched their pace and spacing, noting with some satisfaction that none of them seemed to notice how naturally she adapted to their tactical movement patterns. The exercise was about to begin, and Sarah was exactly where she wanted to be, in a position to demonstrate that sometimes the most dangerous assumption is thinking you know what you're dealing with. The next few hours would determine whether SEAL Team 301's reputation for adapting to unexpected circumstances was justified, or whether they were about to learn that their training had some significant gaps. As they reached the final staging area, Sarah took one last look at her surroundings. The sun was climbing higher in the sky, promising a hot day for the exercise. The training facility stretched out before them like a concrete jungle, its buildings and obstacles waiting to test every skill these elite warriors had learned over years of demanding preparation. In her backpack, hidden beneath her notebook and civilian clothes, Sarah carried equipment that would have surprised anyone who bothered to look carefully. But then, again, not being looked at carefully was exactly what she was counting on. The exercise was about to begin, and she had her own objectives to accomplish. Rodriguez gave the final signal, and SEAL Team 301 began their movement toward what they thought would be a routine training exercise. They had no idea that their biggest challenge wouldn't come from the opposing force waiting in the buildings ahead, but from the quiet woman they had dismissed as just another bureaucratic observer. The next few hours would teach them that in warfare, as in life, the most dangerous enemies often come disguised as something harmless. The exercise began with a precision that had made SEAL Team 301 legendary among special operations communities worldwide. Alpha Squad moved through the simulated urban environment with the silent efficiency of ghosts, their movements coordinated through hand signals and the kind of intuitive understanding that only came from years of working together under the most dangerous conditions imaginable. Sarah maintained her position approximately 50 meters behind Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez's command element, close enough to observe the tactical decisions being made, but far enough back to avoid interfering with the operation. At least, that was what everyone assumed she was doing. In reality, she was conducting her own detailed reconnaissance of the area, while simultaneously tracking the movements of all three squads through their radio communications. The opposing force had established defensive positions throughout the three-story complex that served as the primary target building. Intelligence reports suggested they were holding 3 hostages on the second floor, but Sarah's trained eye had already identified several inconsistencies in the scenario that the SEALs hadn't noticed. The positioning of supposed civilians in the area didn't match normal population patterns, and the tactical setup suggested that someone with real operational experience had designed this exercise to test more than just basic room-clearing procedures. Alpha Squad, led by Chief Petty Officer Mike Torres, approached the main building through a carefully planned route that utilized every available piece of cover. Torres was a 15-year veteran whose service record included deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and several locations that were still classified. His squad moved like a well-oiled machine, each man knowing exactly where the others would be at any given moment. Alpha 1 to command, Torres whispered into his radio, his voice barely audible even through the sophisticated communication equipment. We're in position at the primary breach point. No movement visible through ground floor windows. Rodriguez monitored the communications while keeping one eye on Sarah, who appeared to be taking detailed notes about the proceedings. What he couldn't see was that her notes included precise timings, tactical assessments, and observations about individual team members that went far beyond anything a typical bureaucratic observer would record. Bravo Squad had taken their overwatch positions on the roof of an adjacent building, their sniper rifles providing both intelligence-gathering capability and precision fire support if needed. Sergeant Danny Morrison, serving as the squad's designated marksman, swept his scope across the target building while maintaining a running commentary for the benefit of the other squads. Bravo 2 to all stations, Morrison reported. I have eyes on second-floor windows. Possible movement in the northwest corner room, but I can't get a clear visual on potential hostages. Charlie Squad was responsible for securing the extraction route and maintaining communications with the base command center. Their position near the rear of the building complex also gave them responsibility for preventing any opposing force members from escaping during the assault. It was a crucial but often overlooked role that required constant vigilance and the ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. Sarah noticed that the exercise controllers were monitoring everything through an extensive network of cameras and sensors that had been installed throughout the training facility. Every movement, every radio transmission, and every tactical decision was being recorded for later analysis. It was an impressive setup that would provide valuable training data, but it also meant that her own activities would be subject to the same level of scrutiny. The first phase of the assault began with Alpha Squad's breach of the main building. Using controlled explosives to blow the primary door, they flowed into the structure with the kind of aggressive precision that had been drilled into them through countless hours of training. The sound of the explosion echoed across the training area, followed immediately by the rapid staccato of automatic weapons fire as they encountered the first elements of the opposing force. Contact. Alpha Squad is in heavy contact on the ground floor. Torres called out, his voice remaining calm despite the intensity of the firefight taking place around him. We have at least 6 Alpha personnel in defensive positions, requesting immediate support from Bravo Squad. Morrison and his Overwatch team immediately began engaging targets visible through the building's windows, their precision rifle fire helping to suppress the opposition and allow Alpha Squad to continue their advance. The coordination between the two elements was flawless, demonstrating the kind of teamwork that made SEAL operations so effective in real-world combat situations. Sarah found herself unconsciously analyzing the tactical situation from multiple perspectives simultaneously. Her training had taught her to think like both the attacker and the defender, always looking for weaknesses and opportunities that others might miss. As she watched the exercise unfold, she began to notice several things that concerned her. The opposing force was fighting with a level of coordination and tactical sophistication that seemed unusual for a training exercise. Their defensive positions were well chosen, their fields of fire were interlocking, and their communication appeared to be far more professional than what she would expect from base personnel playing the role of terrorists. Someone had clearly put considerable thought into making this exercise as realistic and challenging as possible. More concerning was the fact that the intelligence provided to SEAL Team 301 appeared to be deliberately inaccurate. The building layout they had been given didn't match what Sarah could observe from her position, and the number of opposing force personnel seemed to be significantly higher than what had been briefed. This wasn't necessarily a problem. Training exercises were often designed to test a unit's ability to adapt to changing circumstances, but it suggested that someone was specifically testing the team's reaction to unexpected challenges. Rodriguez was focused on coordinating his 3 squads through the increasingly complex tactical situation, but Sarah noticed that he was also keeping one eye on her position. She suspected that her reaction to the unfolding combat was being evaluated as much as the performance of his team. Government observers who panicked or interfered during training exercises could create serious problems for unit commanders, and Rodriguez was clearly concerned about her ability to handle the stress of the situation. Alpha Squad fought their way through the ground floor of the building, clearing rooms with the methodical precision that had been drilled into them through years of urban combat training. Each room required careful coordination between team members, with one man providing cover while another cleared potential hiding spots, and a third maintained security for their exit route. It was dangerous, exhausting work that required absolute trust between team members. Alpha 1 to command. Torres reported as his squad reached the stairway leading to the second floor. Ground floor is secure. We have eliminated 8 Alpha personnel, but we're taking heavier resistance than expected. The layout doesn't match our blueprints. There are additional rooms and corridors that weren't in our briefing materials. This confirmed Sarah's suspicions about the intelligence being deliberately inaccurate. Someone was testing the team's ability to adapt to situations where their advance information was wrong, which was exactly the kind of challenge that real-world missions often presented. The question was whether this was a routine training evolution or something more specific. Bravo Squad continued providing Overwatch support from their elevated position, but Morrison was having difficulty maintaining visual contact with Alpha Squad as they moved deeper into the building. The structure's interior layout limited his ability to provide effective fire support, and he was forced to rely increasingly on radio communications to track the progress of the assault. Bravo 2 to command. Morrison called out, I'm losing visual contact with Alpha Squad. The building configuration is blocking most of my sight lines to the second floor. Do you want me to reposition? Rodriguez considered the request while monitoring the tactical situation. Moving the Overwatch team to a new position would take valuable time and might leave Alpha Squad without crucial fire support during a critical phase of the operation. On the other hand, maintaining an Overwatch position that couldn't actually provide Overwatch was potentially worse than having no Overwatch at all. Negative Bravo 2, Rodriguez decided. Maintain your current position and be ready to engage any Alpha personnel attempting to escape through the windows. Alpha Squad will have to handle the interior without direct fire support. Sarah found herself impressed by Rodriguez's decision-making under pressure. He was balancing multiple competing priorities while maintaining overall control of a complex operation, and his choices demonstrated the kind of tactical thinking that had made him an effective special operations commander. However, she also noticed that he was making some assumptions about the opposing force's capabilities that might prove to be problematic. The second floor of the building presented Alpha Squad with an even more challenging tactical environment. The corridors were narrow and offered multiple opportunities for ambush, while the room layout forced them to expose themselves repeatedly to potential enemy fire. Torres led his men forward with careful precision, but Sarah could see that they were beginning to show signs of fatigue from the intense combat they had already experienced. Contact left. One of Alpha's squad members shouted as an opposing force fighter opened fire from a concealed position. The SEALs immediately responded with overwhelming firepower, but the engagement revealed that their enemies were using tactics that went well beyond what would normally be expected in a training exercise. The opposing force fighter had used a technique called shoot and scoot, firing a few rounds from one position before quickly moving to another location where he could engage again. It was a sophisticated tactic that required considerable training and experience, and it was exactly the kind of thing that real terrorists or enemy special operations personnel might use in an actual combat situation. Sarah began to suspect that the base personnel serving as the opposing force might include individuals with considerably more training than had been mentioned in the briefing. The level of tactical sophistication they were demonstrating suggested military experience, possibly special operations experience. This was either an unusually well-designed training exercise, or there was more to this evaluation than anyone had explained to SEAL Team 301. Charlie Squad reported their own challenges as they attempted to secure the extraction route. Several opposing force members had apparently anticipated the SEALs' likely approach and had positioned themselves to interdict the planned escape path. This forced Charlie Squad to engage in their own firefight while simultaneously maintaining their responsibility for communications and extraction support. Charlie 1 to command called out Petty Officer First Class Jake Sullivan, his Texas drawl still evident despite the stress of combat. "We've got multiple contacts along the extraction route. These guys knew exactly where we were planning to go, and they were ready for us. Either they're a lot better at this than we expected, or someone's been sharing our operational plans." This observation sent a chill through Sarah's professional instincts. In her previous career, discovering that an enemy force had advanced knowledge of your plans was usually indicative of either security breach or the presence of opposition personnel with significantly more training and experience than anticipated. Either possibility represented a serious threat to operational success and personnel safety. Rodriguez was clearly thinking along similar lines, as evidenced by his increasingly tense radio communications with his squad leaders. The exercise was not proceeding according to the expected parameters, and he was being forced to make real-time adjustments to his tactical plan while simultaneously trying to maintain control over a rapidly evolving situation. "All stations, this is command," Rodriguez transmitted. "Be advised that OPFOR capabilities appear to exceed briefed expectations. Adjust your tactics accordingly and maintain heightened situational awareness. This exercise will continue until mission completion or exercise termination signal." Sarah noted the careful phrasing of Rodriguez's warning. He was alerting his men to increased danger without explicitly stating that the exercise had gone beyond normal training parameters. It was the kind of professional communication that demonstrated why he had been selected to command an elite unit, but it also revealed his awareness that something unusual was happening. Alpha Squad finally reached the second-floor room where the hostages were supposedly being held, but their approach was met by the most sophisticated opposition they had yet encountered. The opposing force personnel defending the hostage location were using advanced tactical techniques, including coordinated fire and movement, tactical communications, and positioning that demonstrated a thorough understanding of SEAL assault procedures. Alpha 1 to command, Torres reported, his breathing heavy from the physical exertion of combat. "We've reached the hostage location, but OPFOR resistance is extremely heavy. These guys are fighting like professionals, not like base personnel playing terrorist. I need immediate support, or we're going to have to withdraw and reassess." This was exactly what Sarah had been expecting, but she could see that it was causing considerable concern for Rodriguez and his team. SEAL Team 301 was accustomed to being the most highly trained and capable force on any battlefield, but they were now facing opposition that seemed to match their own level of tactical sophistication. It was a humbling and potentially dangerous realization. The exercise had reached a critical point where SEAL Team 301 was being tested at the very limits of their capabilities. What they didn't know was that their most significant challenge wasn't coming from the opposing force in the building, but from the quiet woman who had been observing their every move while making her own preparations for what was about to happen. Sarah checked her watch and noted that the exercise had been running for exactly 47 minutes. According to the briefing materials, the entire scenario was supposed to be completed within 60 minutes, which meant that SEAL Team 301 was falling behind their expected timeline. More importantly, from her perspective, it meant that the moment she had been waiting for was rapidly approaching. The radio communications between the three squads were becoming increasingly urgent as they struggled to adapt to opposition that seemed to anticipate their every move. Sarah could hear the frustration in their voices, but she could also detect something else, the beginning of doubt about their own capabilities. For a unit that prided itself on being able to handle any mission under any circumstances, this was a psychologically significant development. Rodriguez was clearly considering whether to terminate the exercise due to the unexpected level of opposition, but his professional pride and the presence of an official observer were both working against such a decision. SEAL teams were expected to complete their missions regardless of circumstances, and calling off a training exercise would be seen as an admission of failure. As Alpha Squad prepared for what they hoped would be the final assault on the hostage location, Sarah quietly slipped away from her designated observation position. It was time for her to demonstrate why she had really been invited to observe this exercise and why the Department of Defense was so interested in her unique qualifications. The next phase of the exercise was about to begin, and SEAL Team 301 was about to discover that their assumptions about their observer had been as inaccurate as their intelligence about the opposition. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you never see coming, and Sarah Chun had been planning this demonstration for longer than anyone realized. The sound of gunfire continued to echo across the training facility as the elite warriors of SEAL Team 301 fought to complete their mission, unaware that their greatest challenge was just about to reveal itself. Sarah moved through the training facility with a silence that would have impressed even the SEALs if they had been aware of her movement. 8 years of operating in hostile territory had taught her to become invisible when necessary, and right now she needed to reach a specific position without alerting anyone to her intentions. The sound of ongoing combat provided perfect acoustic cover for her movement, masking any small sound she might have made despite her careful technique. Her destination was a maintenance building that sat approximately 200 meters from the main action, positioned to provide an elevated view of the entire training complex. More importantly, it contained equipment and resources that weren't included in any of the briefing materials provided to SEAL Team 301. The building had been carefully prepared for this moment, though none of the participants in the exercise knew that yet. Meanwhile, Alpha Squad was locked in the most challenging firefight of the exercise. The opposing force defending the hostage location was demonstrating tactical capabilities that seemed to match their own, using sophisticated techniques that required years of training to master effectively. Torres found himself questioning whether these were really base personnel playing the role of terrorists, or whether someone had significantly upgraded the opposition for this particular exercise. Alpha 2, move left and provide suppressing fire, Torres commanded, his voice steady despite the intensity of the situation. Alpha 3, you're with me on the breach. We're going to hit them hard and fast before they can reposition. The two SEALs moved with practiced precision, their movements coordinated through months of training together. Alpha 2 laid down a withering stream of automatic weapons fire that forced the opposing force to keep their heads down, while Torres and Alpha 3 prepared to assault their positions directly. It was a classic SEAL tactic that had proven effective in dozens of real-world combat situations. However, the opposing force responded with a level of tactical sophistication that caught even Torres by surprise. Instead of being suppressed by the covering fire, they used a technique called bounds and overwatch to reposition while maintaining their defensive capabilities. It was exactly the kind of advanced tactic that special operations personnel would use, not something that base personnel would typically know how to execute. Rodriguez monitored the situation from his command position, his concern growing with each radio transmission. The exercise was supposed to test his team's capabilities, but It was beginning to feel more like an evaluation of whether they could handle opposition that matched their own level of training. He found himself wondering whether this was a routine training evolution or something more significant. "Command to all stations," Rodriguez transmitted. "Be advised that OPFOR capabilities continue to exceed expectations. All units maintain heightened alert status and report any unusual tactical behaviors immediately." What Rodriguez didn't know was that Sarah had reached her destination and was beginning the final phase of her own mission. The maintenance building contained equipment that she had specifically requested through carefully worded official channels, though her justifications for needing such resources had been deliberately vague. Now it was time to demonstrate why those resources were necessary. Sarah quickly changed from her civilian clothes into a set of tactical gear that would have raised eyebrows among the SEALs if they had seen it. Her equipment included body armor, communications gear, and weapons that were clearly not standard issue for civilian observers. More importantly, her gear was specifically configured for the kind of operation she was about to undertake. The maintenance building also contained detailed intelligence files on every member of SEAL Team 301, including their service records, psychological profiles, and tactical preferences. Sarah had spent weeks studying this information, learning everything there was to know about the men she was about to face. She knew their strengths, their weaknesses, their individual fighting styles, and, most importantly, their assumptions about what they were likely to encounter during a routine training exercise. Alpha Squad finally succeeded in breaching the hostage room, but their victory was complicated by the discovery that the intelligence they had been given was even more inaccurate than they had suspected. Instead of 3 civilian hostages, they found 5 individuals who were clearly not helpless victims waiting to be rescued. These were trained personnel who immediately presented their own tactical challenges. "Alpha 1 to command," Torres reported, his voice betraying confusion for the first time during the exercise. "We've secured the hostage location, but the situation doesn't match our briefing. We have 5 individuals here, not 3, and they're not behaving like typical hostages. I think we need to reassess what we're dealing with." This discovery sent alarm bells through Rodriguez's tactical assessment of the situation. Training exercises were supposed to follow established parameters, and significant deviations from the brief scenario could indicate either a major planning failure or something more serious. He was beginning to suspect that this exercise was testing more than just their tactical capabilities. Bravo Squad, still maintaining their overwatch position, reported their own unusual observations. Morrison had been tracking movement patterns around the training facility, and what he was seeing didn't match normal exercise protocols. There were additional personnel moving through the area who weren't part of either the SEAL team or the known opposing force. "Bravo 2 to command," Morrison called out. "I'm seeing movement in sectors that should be clear. We've got at least 1 individual moving through the maintenance area, and their profile doesn't match known OPFOR personnel. Could be exercise control, but they're not following standard observer protocols." Rodriguez felt his concern level increase significantly. Unknown personnel in the training area represented a potential safety hazard, and his responsibility for the safety of his men took precedence over any exercise objectives. He was about to call for exercise termination when his radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. "SEAL Team 301, this is Raven," came a voice that none of them recognized. The communication was coming through their tactical frequency, which should have been impossible for anyone outside their unit to access. "Your exercise parameters have been modified. You are now dealing with a hostage situation that includes a high-value target who must be extracted alive." The transmission sent shock waves through all 3 squads. The call sign Raven wasn't in any of their briefing materials, and the ability to access their secure communications meant that someone with significant technical capabilities was now involved in the exercise. More concerning was the implication that their mission had been changed without their knowledge or consent. Rodriguez immediately attempted to contact the Exercise Control Center for clarification, but his calls went unanswered. The communication systems that should have connected him to the base command structure appeared to be experiencing technical difficulties. For the first time since the exercise began, he found himself wondering whether they were still participating in a training evolution or had somehow become involved in something more serious. Sarah, now fully equipped and in position, monitored these communications with professional satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly as she had planned, and SEAL Team 301 was beginning to realize that their assumptions about the exercise were fundamentally incorrect. The next phase would test not just their tactical capabilities, but their ability to adapt when everything they thought they knew turned out to be wrong. Charlie Squad reported that their extraction route was now completely compromised, with opposing force personnel having established blocking positions at every predetermined rally point. Sullivan found himself leading his team through terrain they hadn't reconnoitered, tried to establish new routes while maintaining their communications and support responsibilities. Charlie 1 to command, Sullivan reported, his Texas accent more pronounced under stress. All our primary and alternate extraction routes are compromised. OPFOR seems to know exactly where we plan to go, and they were ready for us. We're going to have to improvise, but I don't like our tactical situation. This report confirmed Rodriguez's growing suspicion that the opposing force had access to their operational plans. In a training exercise, such knowledge might be provided to increase the challenge level. In a real-world situation, it would indicate either a security breach or the presence of opposition personnel with intimate knowledge of SEAL tactical procedures. The mystery deepened when Alpha Squad reported that the individuals they had found in the hostage room were providing information that didn't match anything in their briefing materials. These people claimed to be defense contractors who had been conducting classified research when they were taken captive by an unknown force. Their story suggested that the entire scenario was significantly more complex than a simple hostage rescue exercise. Alpha 1 to command, Torres transmitted, his voice reflecting growing confusion. These individuals are claiming that they have classified information that must be protected from enemy forces. They're saying that their capture was part of a larger operation designed to steal defense technology. This doesn't sound like a training scenario anymore. Rodriguez found himself facing a command decision that would have been difficult even for an experienced special operations leader. The exercise appeared to have evolved beyond its original parameters, but he couldn't determine whether this was intentional or whether they had somehow become involved in an actual operational situation. His training told him to continue the mission, but his instincts warned him that something was seriously wrong. Sarah chose this moment to make her first direct contact with SEAL Team 301. Using the Raven call sign she had established, she transmitted new instructions that would force them to make the kind of tactical decisions that separated elite units from conventional forces. All SEAL stations, this is Raven, she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Intelligence indicates that opposing forces have called for reinforcements. You have 15 minutes to complete extraction of all personnel before the area becomes untenable. Your extraction point has been moved to grid reference 7394 to 2156. Acknowledge. The new grid reference placed their extraction point in an area that none of them had reconnoitered and that wasn't covered by any of their contingency plans. More significantly, the 15-minute timeline was aggressive even under ideal circumstances, and their current tactical situation was far from ideal. Rodriguez found himself making rapid calculations about time, distance, opposition strength, and the safety of his men. The new parameters seemed designed to test their ability to function under extreme pressure, but they also introduced risks that went beyond normal training protocols. Raven, this is SEAL Command, Rodriguez responded, requesting confirmation of new parameters through official channels. Current tactical situation requires verification before proceeding. SEAL Command, this is Raven, Sarah replied immediately. Official channels are compromised. You're now operating under Emergency Protocol 7. Complete the mission or risk catastrophic intelligence compromise. Raven out. Emergency Protocol 7 was a classification that Rodriguez recognized but had never encountered in a training environment. It indicated a situation where normal command authority had been suspended due to security concerns, and field commanders were expected to use their own judgment to complete critical missions. If this was genuine, it meant that SEAL Team 301 was now operating in a real-world crisis situation. Alpha Squad began moving the individuals they had found toward the new extraction point, but their progress was immediately challenged by opposing force personnel who seemed to know exactly where they were going. The level of tactical coordination displayed by their opponents continued to suggest capabilities that went far beyond what would be expected in a training exercise. Bravo Squad repositioned to provide overwatch for the new extraction route, but Morrison found himself engaging targets that were using equipment and tactics that seemed inconsistent with the exercise parameters they had been briefed on. The opposing force was demonstrating capabilities that suggested either extensive special operations, training, or actual combat experience. Bravo 2 to command, Morrison reported while engaging a target through his rifle scope. Opfer is using advanced camouflage and concealment techniques. Their movement patterns and tactical behaviors are consistent with professional military personnel, not base staff playing terrorist. I think we need to reassess what we're dealing with. Charlie Squad fought their way toward the new extraction point through opposition that seemed to anticipate their every move. Sullivan found himself leading his team through tactical problems that required the kind of creative thinking that only came from actual combat experience. The exercise had evolved into something that felt very much like real warfare. Sarah monitored all of these developments from her position in the maintenance building, tracking the movement and communications of all three squads while preparing for her own direct intervention in the exercise. The SEALs were performing exactly as she had expected, demonstrating tactical competence while struggling to adapt to a situation that didn't match their preconceived assumptions. The time had come for her to reveal the true purpose of this exercise. SEAL Team 301 was about to discover that their most dangerous opponent wasn't the opposing force they had been fighting, but the quiet civilian observer who had been watching their every move while preparing to demonstrate capabilities they never suspected she possessed. Rodriguez found himself making the kind of command decisions that defined special operations leadership. Despite his growing concerns about the nature of the exercise, he couldn't ignore the possibility that his team was now involved in an actual operational situation. The safety of his men and the completion of their mission required him to treat the situation as real, regardless of whether it had begun as a training exercise. All stations, this is command, he transmitted. We're treating this as a real-world situation until proven otherwise. Execute extraction procedures with all due caution. Stay alert for additional opposition forces, and be prepared for anything. As SEAL Team 301 fought their way toward the new extraction point, none of them realized that their greatest challenge was still to come. The woman they had dismissed as a bureaucratic observer was about to demonstrate why the Department of Defense had been so interested in her unique qualifications, and why this exercise had been designed to test more than just their tactical capabilities. The next few minutes would determine whether SEAL Team 301's reputation for handling any situation was justified, or whether they were about to learn that there were still things in the world of special operations that could surprise even them. The extraction point was located in an open area surrounded by low buildings that provided multiple opportunities for enemy observation and fire. As SEAL Team 301 approached the designated location, they found themselves moving through what every special operations warrior recognized as a perfect kill zone, an area where opposing forces could engage them from multiple directions while they had limited options for cover or concealment. Rodriguez studied the tactical situation through his binoculars, his experienced eye immediately recognizing the danger they were walking into. The new extraction point seemed deliberately chosen to test their ability to operate in the most challenging possible environment, but it also raised serious questions about whoever was now controlling their mission parameters. This doesn't feel right, Rodriguez muttered to himself as he observed the approaches to the extraction zone. Every instinct developed through years of combat operations told him that they were being set up for something, but he couldn't determine whether it was an elaborate training scenario or an actual tactical ambush. Alpha Squad reached the perimeter of the extraction area first, with Torres leading his team through a careful reconnaissance of the surrounding terrain. The individuals they were escorting continued to claim that they possessed classified information that was crucial to national security, but their stories were inconsistent, and their behavior seemed more consistent with trained operatives than civilian contractors. Alpha 1 to command, Torres reported as his team took up defensive positions. We're at the extraction point, but I don't like what I'm seeing. This area provides excellent fields of fire for opposing forces, and we've got limited options for defensive positions. If Opfer wants to hit us here, we're going to be in serious trouble. Bravo Squad had repositioned to provide overwatch from an adjacent rooftop, but Morrison was struggling to identify good firing positions that would allow him to support the extraction without exposing his own team to enemy fire. The tactical geometry of the area seemed designed to neutralize the advantages that normally came from having sniper support. Bravo 2 to command, Morrison called out. I can provide some overwatch, but My sight lines are limited, and I'm seeing movement in areas that could indicate prepared ambush positions. If this is still an exercise, someone put a lot of thought into making it as realistic as possible. Charlie's squad approached the extraction point from a different angle, but Sullivan found his team moving through terrain that channeled them toward specific routes that seemed too convenient to be accidental. His combat experience told him that they were being herded toward predetermined locations, which was never a good sign in any tactical situation. Charlie won to command, Sullivan reported, his Texas drawl carrying a note of concern. We're being channeled into specific approach routes. Either this is incredibly detailed exercise planning, or someone who knows how we think has been setting up this tactical situation. I don't like the feeling that we're dancing to someone else's tune. Rodriguez found himself facing a command decision that would define the outcome of whatever situation they were now involved in. His team was positioned in an area that provided significant tactical advantages to opposing forces. They were escorting individuals whose stories didn't add up, and they were operating under communications protocols that seemed inconsistent with normal training procedures. The decision was made for him when Sarah chose that moment to reveal herself. The first indication that something had fundamentally changed came when the radio frequencies that SEAL Team 301 had been using for tactical communications suddenly went silent. The sophisticated encryption systems that should have protected their transmissions from outside interference had apparently been compromised or overridden by someone with access to classified communication protocols. All SEAL stations, this is Raven, came Sarah's voice, but this time the transmission was coming from multiple directions simultaneously. She had positioned speakers throughout the training area that allowed her to communicate with them, while making it impossible to determine her actual location. You are now in a compromised position with limited tactical options. Your mission parameters have changed again. Rodriguez attempted to respond, but discovered that his radio was no longer transmitting on the frequencies he had been using. Someone had taken control of their communication systems and was forcing them to operate according to new rules that they didn't understand. Your extraction has been delayed indefinitely, Sarah continued, her voice carrying the professional authority of someone accustomed to controlling tactical situations. Opposing forces have reinforced the area and are prepared to engage any movement toward your current location. You have two options: surrender and submit to capture, or fight your way out against superior numbers and positioning. The announcement sent shockwaves through all three squads. SEAL teams were trained never to surrender under any circumstances, but they were also trained to recognize when tactical situations had evolved beyond their ability to handle through conventional means. The choice being presented to them seemed designed to test their psychological limits as much as their tactical capabilities. Alpha Squad immediately began establishing defensive positions around the individuals they had been escorting, but Torres found himself questioning whether these people were really the victims they appeared to be, or whether they were somehow part of whatever was happening to his team. Alpha 2, watch R6, Torres commanded. Alpha 3, establish security to the east. I don't know what we're dealing with, but we're not going down without a fight. Bravo Squad attempted to identify the source of the voice transmissions, but Morrison's efforts to locate the speakers or identify potential enemy positions were hampered by the sophisticated setup that had been established throughout the training area. Whoever was controlling the situation had clearly spent considerable time preparing for this moment. Bravo 2 to any station, Morrison called out, attempting to establish communication with his team members. I can't locate the source of these transmissions, and our normal radio frequencies seem to be jammed. We're operating blind here. Charlie Squad found themselves cut off from the main force when opposing forces suddenly appeared in positions that blocked their access to the extraction point. Sullivan realized that his team was now isolated and would have to fight their way through prepared defensive positions if they wanted to rejoin the rest of the unit. Charlie 1 attempting to reach extraction point, Sullivan reported, though he wasn't sure if anyone could hear his transmission. We're encountering heavy resistance and may need to find alternate routes. This is way beyond anything we trained for. Rodriguez found himself in command of a unit that was scattered across a hostile area, facing opposition of unknown strength and capability, while operating under communication protocols that had been compromised by an unknown force. It was exactly the kind of worst-case scenario that Special Operations commanders train to handle, but it was also unlike anything he had experienced in either training or actual combat. The psychological pressure was intensified when Sarah made her next announcement, this time revealing information that shocked even the experienced warriors of SEAL Team 301. SEAL Team 301, your performance during this exercise has been recorded and analyzed in real time. Her voice announced from the speaker's position throughout the area. Your tactical decisions, individual responses to stress, and team coordination have all been evaluated according to classified criteria. You are now participating in an assessment that will determine your suitability for classified operations that go beyond your current mission parameters. This revelation fundamentally changed the nature of what they had thought was a routine training exercise. If they were actually being evaluated for new operational roles, then their performance during the next few minutes could determine the future direction of their careers. More concerning was the implication that someone with access to highly classified programs had been studying their capabilities without their knowledge. Your observer, Sarah Chun, is not a civilian bureaucrat, the announcement continued. She is a former operative with 8 years of experience in classified programs that officially do not exist. Her presence during this exercise was designed to evaluate your ability to recognize and respond to threats that do not match your standard threat assessment protocols. The news that their supposed civilian observer was actually a trained operative sent shock waves through the team. Every man in SEAL Team 301 prided himself on the ability to assess potential threats, and the fact that they had all missed the true nature of their observer represented a significant failure of their professional judgment. Rodriguez felt a mixture of anger and professional embarrassment as he realized how completely they had been deceived. Sarah Chun had been among them for hours, observing their tactics and behavior while concealing her own capabilities. If she was actually a threat, she had been in position to cause serious damage to his unit before they ever realized the danger. Ms. Chun, if that's your real name, Rodriguez called out, attempting to locate her position through visual scanning of the area. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but my men deserve to know what they're really dealing with here. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, Sarah responded, her voice now carrying a note of professional respect that hadn't been present during her earlier civilian persona. Your team has been performing exactly as expected. You've demonstrated tactical competence, adaptability under pressure, and the kind of professional teamwork that makes SEAL units effective in real-world operations. Alpha Squad continued maintaining their defensive positions, but Torres found himself re-evaluating everything that had happened during the exercise. If their observer had actually been a trained operative, then her assessment of their performance carried implications that went far beyond a simple training evaluation. However, Sarah continued, you've also demonstrated some significant vulnerabilities that could be exploited by opponents who understand how SEAL teams think and operate. Your assumptions about threat identification, your reliance on standard tactical procedures, and your confidence in your own capabilities can all be turned against you by enemies who have studied your methods. Bravo Squad attempted to establish new firing positions that would give them better coverage of the area, but Morrison found himself wondering how much of their tactical planning had been observed and analyzed by their supposed civilian observer. If she had been evaluating their capabilities while concealing her own, then she possessed information about their strengths and weaknesses that could be extremely dangerous in the wrong hands. The psychological impact of these revelations was exactly what Sarah had been counting on. SEAL Team 301 was now operating in a state of uncertainty about their mission, their communications, their intelligence, and even their own security. It was exactly the kind of disorientation that could be used to test their ability to function when all their normal advantages had been neutralized. Charlie 1 to any station, Sullivan called out, his voice carrying frustration as well as concern. I don't care who this woman is or what kind of evaluation this is supposed to be. My team is pinned down by opposing forces that are using real ammunition, and we need immediate support. This has gone way beyond any reasonable training scenario. The mention of real ammunition sent alarm bells through Rodriguez's tactical assessment. Training exercises used marking rounds or blank ammunition specifically to prevent accidental injuries, and the use of live ammunition would represent a serious escalation in the level of danger his men were facing. All stations, this is command, Rodriguez transmitted, hoping that some of his communications were still reaching his team members. Report your ammunition status immediately. If OPFOR is using live rounds, we need to treat this as a combat situation and respond accordingly. Sarah had been monitoring these communications, and she knew that the psychological pressure on SEAL Team 301 had reached the point where they were ready for the final phase of her demonstration. It was time to reveal the true purpose of this exercise and show them capabilities that would challenge everything they thought they knew about modern warfare. The next few minutes would determine whether SEAL Team 301's reputation for handling any situation was justified, or whether they were about to discover that there were still things in the world that could surprise even the most elite special operations warriors. The woman they had dismissed as a harmless civilian observer was about to demonstrate why the Department of Defense had been so interested in her unique qualifications. As the sun reached its highest point in the sky, casting sharp shadows across the training facility, Sarah prepared to make her final move in what had been an elaborate chess game played with real warriors on a real battlefield. SEAL Team 301 was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you never see coming. The final demonstration began when Sarah stepped out from behind a concrete barrier approximately 100 meters from Alpha Squad's position. She was now fully equipped in tactical gear that immediately identified her as a professional operator rather than a civilian observer. Her movement was fluid and confident, displaying the kind of situational awareness that only came from years of experience in hostile environments. Rodriguez's first instinct was to treat her as a hostile target, but something in her posture and the deliberate nature of her reveal suggested that she wanted to communicate rather than engage in immediate combat. Through his binoculars, he could see that she was armed but not in an aggressive stance. SEAL Team 301, this is your final evaluation, Sarah announced, her voice now coming from a communication device rather than the speakers that had been positioned throughout the area. I'm going to demonstrate capabilities that your training has not prepared you to counter. Your mission is to capture or neutralize me using any tactics you consider appropriate. You have 15 minutes. The challenge was unprecedented in the experience of every member of SEAL Team 301. They had faced human opponents in training and combat, but never in a situation where a single individual was deliberately presenting herself as a target while claiming to possess capabilities that could match their collective skills. Torres immediately began coordinating Alpha Squad's response, but he found himself hesitating about the appropriate level of force to use against what appeared to be a lone female opponent. His training had taught him to assess threats based on capability rather than appearance, but the situation was unlike anything he had encountered in over 15 years of special operations. Alpha 2 and Alpha 3 established flanking positions Torres commanded. We'll approach from 3 directions and force her into a position where she has to surrender. Keep your weapons ready, but hold fire unless she presents a clear threat. Bravo Squad attempted to provide overwatch support, but Morrison discovered that Sarah had chosen her position in an area where his sight lines were limited by the surrounding buildings. Her understanding of the tactical geometry suggested military training that went far beyond what would be expected from a civilian contractor. Bravo 2 to command, Morrison reported. Target has positioned herself in an area where I can't get a clear shot. Her choice of ground suggests she understands sniper capabilities and limitations. This is an amateur hour. Charlie Squad attempted to move into supporting positions, but Sullivan found that the opposing force personnel who had been harassing them throughout the exercise were still active and preventing his team from maneuvering effectively. The tactical situation had become a complex multidimensional problem that challenged their ability to coordinate their response. Sarah waited patiently as SEAL Team 301 began their approach, using the time to make final adjustments to equipment that none of them had seen before. Her tactical gear included devices that appear to be far more advanced than standard military issue, suggesting access to classified technology that matched her claims about working in programs that officially didn't exist. Alpha Squad's approach was textbook perfect from a tactical standpoint, with each team member moving through carefully chosen routes that minimized their exposure while maximizing their ability to coordinate their actions. However, Sarah's response demonstrated why she had been so confident about her abilities. The first indication that SEAL Team 301 was facing something beyond their experience came when Alpha 2 disappeared. One moment, he was moving through a carefully planned approach route, maintaining radio contact and visual signals with the rest of his squad. The next moment, he was simply gone, as if he had vanished into thin air. There was no sound of struggle, no indication of what had happened, and no response to radio calls. Alpha 2, report your position, Torres called out, his voice carrying the first note of real concern he had shown during the entire exercise. Alpha 2 acknowledged immediately. The silence that followed was more unsettling than any amount of gunfire would have been. SEAL Team 301 had lost contact with one of their members under circumstances that defied explanation, and the psychological impact was immediate and profound. Sarah's voice came through their communication system with an explanation that sent chills through every member of the team. Alpha 2 has been neutralized using non-lethal methods, she announced calmly. He is unconscious but uninjured and will recover fully within approximately 30 minutes. His equipment has been secured to prevent him from rejoining the exercise. You now have 12 minutes to complete your mission with reduced personnel. Rodriguez found himself facing a tactical situation that challenged every assumption he had made about their opponent. Sarah Chun had somehow managed to neutralize a fully trained and alert SEAL operator without creating any sound or disturbance that would alert his teammates. The level of skill required for such an action suggested capabilities that went far beyond anything they had anticipated. All stations, this is command, Rodriguez transmitted, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had made a command decision under impossible circumstances. We are now treating this as a combat situation. Rules of engagement are authorized for threat neutralization. Take her down. The authorization for full combat engagement represented a significant escalation, but Rodriguez had concluded that they were facing an opponent who possessed capabilities that justified treating her as a genuine threat to his men's safety. If Sarah Chun could neutralize trained SEAL operators without detection, then she represented a level of danger that required an appropriate response. Alpha Squad immediately shifted to more aggressive tactics, with Torres leading a direct assault on Sarah's position, while Alpha 3 attempted to circle behind her. However, their opponent seemed to anticipate their every move, repositioning herself with a speed and efficiency that suggested intimate familiarity with SEAL tactical procedures. The engagement that followed lasted exactly 97 seconds and would be studied in special operations training centers for years afterward. Sarah moved through the tactical environment like a ghost, using terrain features and timing to stay ahead of Alpha Squad's attempts to pin her down. Her movement patterns were unlike anything the SEALs had encountered, combining elements of traditional military tactics with techniques that seemed to come from completely different training systems. She's not fighting like military personnel, Torres reported as he struggled to maintain contact with his target. Her movement patterns are too unpredictable, and she's using techniques I've never seen before. It's like she knows what we're going to do before we do it. Bravo Squad attempted to provide fire support, but Morrison found himself unable to get a clear shot at a target who seemed to move through the environment as if she understood exactly where he would be looking at any given moment. Her understanding of sniper capabilities was so detailed that she consistently stayed in areas where she couldn't be effectively engaged. Bravo 2 to command, Morrison called out, frustration evident in his voice. Target appears to have intimate knowledge of sniper tactics and is using that knowledge to stay in my blind spots. I can't get a shot, and I'm beginning to think she's been trained specifically to counter sniper threats. Charlie Squad finally managed to break free from the opposing force that had been keeping them pinned down, but when they arrived at the main engagement area, they found a tactical situation that defied their understanding of small unit combat dynamics. Sarah had somehow managed to separate Alpha Squad into individual operators who were no longer able to coordinate their actions effectively. Torres found himself isolated from his team members, while Alpha 3 was pinned down in a position where he couldn't provide support to anyone else. Charlie 1 to command, Sullivan reported as he assessed the tactical situation. Alpha Squad has been separated and appears to be engaged with a single target who is controlling the entire battlefield. I've never seen anything like this. The demonstration reached its climax when Sarah executed a series of movements that resulted in the neutralization of the remaining members of Alpha Squad within a span of less than 30 seconds. Using a combination of speed, precision, and what appeared to be an intimate understanding of human psychology, she managed to take down 2 more SEAL operators without causing them serious injury. Alpha 1 and Alpha 3 have been neutralized, Sarah announced over their communication system. They're unconscious but uninjured. Your team now consists of Bravo and Charlie squads, along with command element. You have 7 minutes remaining. Rodriguez found himself in command of a unit that had been reduced by more than half through the actions of a single opponent who had demonstrated capabilities that seemed to exceed those of his entire team. The psychological impact of watching elite warriors being systematically defeated by someone they had dismissed as a harmless civilian observer was profound and disturbing. Bravo Squad attempted to reposition for a coordinated assault, but Morrison found that Sarah had somehow gained access to their radio communications and was providing commentary on their tactical planning in real time. Bravo Squad, your plan to approach in the northeast is predictable. Her voice came through their headsets. SEAL tactical doctrine calls for coordinated movement from multiple directions, but your limited personnel and the terrain constraints make your options obvious to anyone who has studied your methods. The demonstration that she could intercept and analyze their tactical communications while simultaneously engaging multiple opponents represent a level of capability that challenged their understanding of what was possible for a single operator to achieve. Charlie Squad made their own attempt to engage Sarah directly, but Sullivan found himself facing an opponent who seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to predict and counter their tactical movements. Every technique they had learned through years of training was anticipated and neutralized before it could be effectively employed. Charlie won to command, Sullivan reported, his voice carrying a note of professional amazement. This woman is fighting like she wrote the book on SEAL tactics. She knows what we're going to do before we do it, and she's got answers for everything we've tried. The final phase of the demonstration came when Sarah chose to end the exercise on her own terms rather than allowing it to continue to its scheduled conclusion. Moving with a speed and precision that left the remaining SEAL operators struggling to keep pace, she executed a series of actions that resulted in the neutralization of the remaining team members. Morrison found himself unable to maintain his overwatch position when Sarah somehow managed to approach his location from a direction he had considered impossible to access. His years of sniper training had taught him to believe that his elevated position provided security against ground-based threats, but Sarah demonstrated techniques that rendered such assumptions meaningless. Sullivan and the remaining members of Charlie Squad were systematically defeated using methods that combined physical capability with psychological manipulation. Sarah's understanding of how SEAL operators thought and responded under pressure allowed her to exploit weaknesses that none of them had realized they possessed. When the exercise officially concluded, SEAL Team 301 found themselves in the unprecedented position of having been completely defeated by a single opponent who had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded their collective abilities. The psychological impact was profound, but it was also educational in ways that would influence their training and operations for years to come. Rodriguez stood in the aftermath of the exercise, surrounded by his men who were slowly recovering from their various states of unconsciousness and disorientation. The woman who had identified herself as Sarah Chun stood nearby, having removed her tactical gear and returned to an appearance that was much closer to the civilian observer they had originally met. "Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez," Sarah said, her voice carrying a note of professional respect that acknowledged the difficulty of what his team had just experienced. "Your men performed exactly as expected. They demonstrated tactical competence, courage under pressure, and the kind of professional dedication that makes SEAL units effective in conventional combat situations. However," she continued, "they also demonstrated vulnerabilities that could be exploited by opponents who understand modern special operations capabilities and limitations. The threats you will face in future operations may include individuals and organizations who have studied your methods and developed countermeasures that neutralize your traditional advantages." Rodriguez found himself listening to an after-action briefing that was unlike any he had experienced in his career. The woman who had just systematically defeated his entire team was now providing analysis that would reshape their understanding of modern warfare and the evolving nature of the threats they might face. "The purpose of this exercise," Sarah explained, "was to evaluate your team's ability to recognize and adapt to opposition that operates outside the parameters of conventional military doctrine. Your performance will be used to develop new training programs that prepare special operations units for threats that current doctrine doesn't address." As the members of SEAL Team 301 gradually recovered and began processing what they had experienced, they found themselves facing a fundamental reevaluation of their assumptions about their own capabilities and the nature of modern warfare. The woman they had dismissed as a harmless civilian observer had taught them lessons that would influence their approach to special operation for the rest of their careers. The exercise was over, but its implications would continue to resonate throughout the special operations community for years to come. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from discovering that there are still things in the world that can surprise even the most elite warriors, and that the greatest danger often comes from the enemy you never see coming until it's too late to defend against them. Sarah Chun gathered her equipment and prepared to leave the training facility, her mission accomplished and her evaluation of SEAL Team 301 complete. Behind her, 31 of America's elite warriors began the process of understanding how a single opponent had managed to defeat them all, and what that meant for the future of special operations in an increasingly complex and dangerous world.